before the Red Sea ever split, before Pharaoh's pride was crushed beneath rushing waters, before fire crowned a mountain and thunder spoke commandments into stone. There was a night so quiet, so brief, and so dangerous that history nearly lost its greatest prophet. This is the story Scripture tells in only a few lines, and the story most people never stop to ask about. This is the story of Zipporah, the woman who saved Moses. Moses was a man caught between worlds, born Hebrew, raised Egyptian, a prince who became a fugitive, a shepherd who carried a calling heavier than any crown. When God first spoke to Moses from the burning bush, the fire did not consume the branches, but it did consume his excuses. He argued, he doubted, he feared. But in the end, obedience pulled him back toward Egypt, back toward the place of his deepest failure, back toward the people he had fled. Zipporah followed him. She was not born into Israel. She was not raised on the stories of Abraham or the covenant of circumcision. She was the daughter of Jethro, priest of Midian, a desert people, wise in survival, strong in tradition, but outside the promises given to Jacob's sons. She met Moses when he was broken. Not a prince, not a leader, just a man sitting beside a well, having run farther than he ever imagined possible. She gave him water. She brought him home. She watched him trade royal robes for shepherd's wool. She married a man haunted by two identities and bore him sons who belonged fully to neither world. And yet when God called Moses back to Egypt, Zipporah went with him. No voice from heaven spoke to her. No burning bush called her name. But obedience is not always announced. Sometimes it is proven in silence. They traveled at night through dry land and uncertainty, toward Pharaoh, toward confrontation, toward destiny. And then, without warning, everything stopped. Scripture says it simply, almost too simply. On the way, at a lodging place, the Lord met Moses and sought to kill him. No explanation, no build-up, no mercy mentioned. The man God had just chosen to deliver Israel suddenly stood under a sentence of death, issued not by Pharaoh, but by God himself. Moses, the bearer of miracles, was powerless. No staff could save him. No words could argue his way out. Something was wrong. And Zipporah saw it. The Bible does not describe Moses crying out. It does not describe angels appearing. It does not describe thunder or fire. It describes a woman acting. Zipporah understood what Moses had neglected. Their son had not been circumcised. Circumcision was not a cultural detail. It was the sign of the covenant God made with Abraham, a physical declaration that a household belonged to him. Moses had been chosen to confront Pharaoh over obedience. Yet his own house stood in partial disobedience. The deliverer was out of alignment, and alignment with God is not optional. Zipporah did not hesitate. She took a sharp stone, primitive, urgent, unforgiving. She circumcised her son with her own hands. This was not ritual comfort. This was emergency obedience. Then she touched the foreskin to Moses and spoke words heavy with tension and pain. "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." They were not poetic words. They were raw, human, full of emotion. Blood had sealed their marriage more than once now. First through sacrifice of identity, now through covenant obedience. And Scripture says, so he let him alone. Death stepped back. Judgment passed over. Moses lived because Zipporah understood what Moses had overlooked. Let that settle. The man chosen to confront Pharaoh was saved by the obedience of his wife. The prophet who would stretch his staff over seas was powerless until a woman acted in faith. Zipporah never stood before Pharaoh. She never raised a staff. She never spoke a plague into existence. But without her, Moses would never have arrived. And then, quietly, she fades from the story. After this moment, Scripture rarely speaks her name again. She is sent back to Midian for a time. Moses steps fully into his calling. History remembers the miracles, but heaven remembers the obedience. Zipporah's story reminds us of something uncomfortable and holy. God does not excuse disobedience because of destiny. Calling does not cancel covenant. Public mission does not outweigh private faithfulness. Moses could part seas, but he could not ignore God's commands in his own home. And Zipporah, foreign, uncelebrated, often misunderstood, became the instrument God used to correct his chosen servant. This story is not about marital conflict. It is not about ritual violence. It is not about anger or resentment. It is about alignment. Zipporah recognized the moment when obedience could not wait for discussion. She understood that delayed obedience is still disobedience, and she acted, even when it cost her emotionally. Scripture does not say she was joyful. It does not say she was calm. It says she was decisive. Faith is not always gentle. Sometimes it is urgent. Sometimes salvation arrives not through miracles, but through obedience performed at the last possible moment. Zipporah teaches us that God's plans move forward through those willing to act, not only those called to lead. She teaches us that women in Scripture were not passive shadows. They were active participants in salvation history. She teaches us that obedience inside the home matters just as much as obedience on the world stage. And perhaps most importantly, she teaches us that God sees what others overlook. Moses would be remembered as the lawgiver. Zipporah would be remembered, if at all, as a footnote. But heaven recorded her obedience in blood and mercy. If this story unsettles you, it should. It reminds us that God is holy, that His covenant matters, that leadership without obedience is hollow. But it also comforts us, because it shows that God uses unexpected people at critical moments. That faith is not measured by visibility. That quiet obedience can change the course of history. Zipporah did not part seas. She prevented a death, and sometimes that is the greater miracle. Her story was not untold because it was unimportant. It was untold because it was uncomfortable, because it challenges our assumptions about who God uses and how. But Scripture preserved it for a reason, so we would remember that obedience is never small, that alignment matters, that salvation sometimes comes through the hands of those history barely names. Zipporah saved Moses, and because she did, Israel was delivered, the law was given, and the story of redemption continued. Not because of power, not because of status, but because of obedience, at the edge of death, in the quiet of night, through the courage of a woman who refused to hesitate when heaven demanded action. If you enjoy exploring the quiet mysteries of the Bible, you're welcome to walk this journey with us. Subscribe, and let's keep asking the deeper questions together.